Harry Truman desegregated the Army in 1948. Many people hated the decision. When he desegregated the Army, the African Americans and whites had to work together in the armed forces. When he executed Order 9981, this enforced all the armed forces to desegregate. The Air Force accepted this command immediately, but the Navy and Army took until 1954 to accept. All African Americans who received medals in World War I and World War II only received them in 1990. The war ended in 1945. That means that all African Americans who won medals in the war received them 45 years later. Some of them were probably not still alive. And this is how Harry Truman desegregated the Army. Oh, you're recording extra.
Oh. Brown versus Board of Education. The Brown versus Board of Education case was a case fighting for equal access in schools to African American children.
This all started when Linda Brown was not allowed to attend her local white school.
13 African American families, including the Brown family, filed a lawsuit against the Kansas Board of Education to fight the unfair separate but equal law.
The Supreme Court justice said that segregation was wrong and that it wasn't right for white children to have supremacy, so they made it illegal.
They ruled that the public schools could not be separated.
So segregationists closed public schools and opened private schools so that the court couldn't desegregate.
From 1959 to 1964, approximately 1,700 African American children were all left without a school to attend.
Over time, things did get better for the African American children, and the Brown case opened the Supreme Court's eyes.
Think where education would be if not for this legendary case.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was trying to make conditions for blacks in the South better than they already were. In order to do this, they put together sit-ins, marches, the bus band, etc. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference is an organization of black ministers created in 1957 that coordinated civil rights activities. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference took place in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin Luther King Jr. was president of the SCLC and moved to Atlanta, Georgia to devote more time to it. At times, there were challenges. Most white people did not agree with the idea of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and did everything in their power to stop it. The SCLC has affected the lives of many Americans, not only blacks, but whites too. Written by Lily Nielsen and Anna Kenyon. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was trying to make conditions for blacks in the South better than they already were. In order to do this, they put together sit-ins, marches, the bus band, etc. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference is an organization of black ministers created in 1957 that coordinated civil rights activities. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference took place in Atlanta, Georgia.
Our research project is on the Little Rock Nine by Arno and Luca.
The Little Rock Nine interrogation took place at Central Arkansas High School.
We were the first African American kids to integrate into the Central High School of Little Rock, Arkansas.
The movement was declared in 1954, began in 1955, and happened in 1957.
Challenges the Little Rock Nine faced were death threats, racism, self-confidence, other kids, angry mobs, and bullies.
They were in such danger, the government had to send the state guards to protect the 9 kids.
The final outcome of the schools being integrated was white children and black children went to school together and both got equal education.
The Freedom Riders departed from Washington, D.C. on May 4th. They were all black, but some of the white people helped them. The Freedom Riders traveled through Virginia and North Carolina before arriving in Rock Hill, South Carolina on May 9th. Rock Hill was the first scene of violence for the Freedom Riders. The Freedom Riders continued their travel through Atlanta, Georgia, arriving in Anniston, Alabama on May 14th. The buses were attacked, and yet again the Freedom Riders were beaten. Later that evening, they arrived in Birmingham, Alabama, and were beaten with baseball bats, iron pipes, and bicycle chains by the Ku Klux Klan. The white people were also beaten for helping the black people. May 20th, they arrived in Montgomery, Alabama. They were beaten again, and federal marshals Abernathy and Martin Luther King led a mass rally. The original destination for the Freedom Riders was New Orleans, Louisiana. However, the ride ended in Jackson, Mississippi due to the mass arrests at the bus terminal.
Governor Wallace was forced to integrate schools on June 12, 1963. He was a very racist man. In 1962, he was elected governor of Alabama. In 1963, he did not allow 2 black students to enroll in school. Units of National Guard came and Governor Wallace allowed them to enroll. On the same day, Wallace closed all integrated schools. The next day, there was a lot of violence. There was a compromise. Federal troops would not be used if local police did not get in the way of integration. In 1964, he tried to win the Democratic nomination, but everyone thought he was racist.
The Poll Tax Outlawed with the 24th Amendment by Thea Kendall Green, Joy Mahoney, and Alex Carpenter. The poll tax was an unfair way of making it hard for African Americans to vote, while still being legal. The poll tax was originally $2, which is like $50 today. They also had to pass insanely hard literary tests and other restrictions. It was started by Mississippi in 1890. After Mississippi, other southern states followed. This caused thousands of African Americans to be unable to vote. Opposition to the poll tax increased during World War II because it was hard to justify soldiers defending their country having to pay money to vote. So Congress passed the Soldier Vote Act in 1942. Now soldiers would be able to vote without the restrictions. After the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, Congress passed the 24th Amendment banning poll taxes in all elections. This was one step toward giving African American equal rights. Thanks for watching!
The Mississippi's Freedom Project's goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. The Mississippi Summer Freedom Project's goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. Robert Moses was the founder of the Mississippi Summer Freedom Project. In the South, if a black woman or man wanted to vote, they would either close the polls or give them questions on literary tests that were impossible to answer. Hundreds of white students from the South. Mississippi Summer Freedom Project goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. The Mississippi Summer Freedoms Project goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. The Mississippi Summer Freedom Project's goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. The Mississippi Summer Freedom Project's goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. The Mississippi Summer Freedoms Project goal was to help African Americans gain their voting rights. It went from 1954 to 1968. Robert Moses was the founder of the Mississippi Summer Freedom Project. In the South, if a black woman or man wanted to vote, They would either close the polls or give them questions on literary tests that were impossible to answer. Hundreds of white students from the North went down to the South to help the blacks with their voting rights. The Southerners did not take it well. The white Northerners went through constant abuse and harassment from the Ku Klux Klan, local authorities, and the police, the white population. The students who went down to help with voting rights were called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. For 3 years, they faced many hardships while trying to help blacks vote. The SNCC helped raise awareness all over Mississippi about what was happening to African Americans in the South. The Mississippi Summer Freedom Project was a success. It helped 80,000 blacks register to vote in the mock election.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mass movement to secure racial equality for African Americans. The Civil Rights Act stopped federal funding towards discrimination against blacks and gave them full right to vote. The African American people wanted equal opportunities. During the Civil Rights Movement, many protests and marches occurred. In 1954, under the decision Oliver Brown v. Board of Education, racial segregation in public schools was ruled unconstitutional. This overturned the separate but equal law from the Plessy v. Ferguson case. On July 2, 1964, President Johnson signed the act. The southern states did not approve of this idea and refused to give blacks full rights.
This is about the letter from Birmingham jail. The North sent troops down to the South. They started to arrest people that would join MLK. He had a lot of people join his cause. MLK was arrested for protesting for equal rights for blacks and for blacks to vote without having to pay fines or take tests. MLK was sent to Birmingham jail. Birmingham jail was not a very good place for blacks at the time in 1963. While in jail, MLK wrote the letter. In the end, everyone was able to vote without having to pay fines or take impossible tests.